Hello and good morning, everyone. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone to this second DADI webinar. Today's webinar is a technical webinar. So today we will concentrate on the FHIR standard and the data. How do we use data in the DADI project, and how the FHIR data is being implemented in the system. So today we really only look at the data aspects and the technical aspects of this project. So today we have presenting our colleagues Noel Diamant, Veronica Lipucci de Paolo, and Marcos Fernandez Gomez. So let's move into the practical details. So today's session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available through the EMA corporate website, and we will also add a link to this recording on the eSubmissions website. We are also making use of the Slido tool. So at the certain points throughout the meeting, you will be asked, you will be able to ask questions and give input via this tool called Slido. Please note that the interaction through Slido is voluntary, and you may want to remain anonymous. And then I will give you the details on how to join Slido. And please, in Slido, you can send your questions, and you can also upvote questions where you would like to hear us answer those questions. We will have a Q&A session at the end, but we will also answer questions where we can during the session. And we'll also, during the Q&A session, we will show the questions on the screen, and they'll be managed in that Q&A session. So I will keep this slide here for a little bit longer so you can note down the details on the slide. Then if we look at the content of today, I'm Christina Pusari. I am one of the product co-owners for the DADI project, and I'll represent EMA and the centralized procedure in this project. So we will start with the introduction to the variation FHIR message, and then we'll look at a little bit of the mapping and the examples. We'll have a Q&A session, so we have 30 minutes for this Q&A session, and then we'll be closing the meeting at 12 o'clock. So if we have a look at a little bit of what the DADI project is. So DADI is a network project which is led by the EMA, and it will support both centralized procedure applications and national procedures. So for mutual recognition and pure NAPs, just as today. The main aim of this project is to replace today's current interactive PDF forms used for all European procedures. And of course, because it is a network project and the forms cover all types of procedures, both EMA and NCAs are very closely involved so that the results can fulfill current and upcoming requirements. As mentioned, we have two product owners, so the product ownership is shared between EMA and NCAs, and the network product owner participation is funded by the Unicom project from the Horizon 2020 call. And we also, of course, have a subject matter experts group. We work very closely with colleagues from NCAs and industry, where we can discuss and meet on regular weekly basis to discuss any aspects related to the DADI project and the requirements from different stakeholders. So now I would like to hand over to my colleague Veronica, who will start the presentation.
Many thanks, Christina, and good morning, everyone. I am Veronica Lipucci di Paola. I am the co-owner of PMS, and I will be presenting you an introduction on what are the main objectives of this meeting that we aim to achieve with you. So as kindly anticipated by Christina, the webinar will focus mainly on the data aspect of the two projects that you know are named DADI and PMS. So for this reason, we aim to provide you information to technical experts from industry and from national competent authorities, the NCAs, on five main aspects. So 4 services of SPORE, which is a SPORE program, in particular focusing on the role played by the upcoming product management service, a general introduction of the variation FHIR format. We will provide you also further clarification on the PMS data model and how it actually links to the eAF. You will also be provided clarification on the origin of the migrated data from the existing database. And in addition, some details which are related to the data mapping of the electronic application form and marketing authorization of medicinal products to FHIR. And last but not least, some information related to the UIDMP implementation guidance, the latest version 2.1. So I will start by providing you some few concepts related to the SPORE program. As you know, the agency, in cooperation with the EU regulatory network, is in the process of implementing in the European Union the standards developed by the International Organization for Standardization. These standards aims to identify and describe medicinal products for human use by using indeed standardized definitions. Such implementation is based on the Article 25 and 26 of the Commission Implementing Regulation 520/2012. The program is established to implement the ISO DMP standards, and the program is called SPORE. It consists in a phase program based of the 4 main domains of master data to be used within the pharmaceutical regulatory processes. So these master data are substances, products, organization, and referential master data. As reported in the table at the bottom right, the scope of the ISO DMP standards and therefore the SPORE program is to uniquely identify and exchange information of substances, which is in accordance to indeed the ISO has reported here 11238, and this is the basis for the SMS service, Substance Management Service. Pharmaceutical dose form, units and presentation, routes of administration and packaging, the ISO mentioned in 11239, units of measurements 11240, these are the basis for the referential management service. While the ISO standards 11616 and 11615, so regulating the pharmaceutical product information and regulating the medicinal products information, this represents the basis for the development and implementation of product management service, the so known as PMS. With this introduction about the SPORE program and the ISO DMP standards, I will provide you now more details in relation to the scope of the PMS service. So as I was mentioning, the PMS service aims to structure product data in a standardized way. So the scope of this standardization that we aim to achieve is to enhance the level of the data quality and to gain process efficiency. In addition, by launching the use of PMS, we also aim to enhance the data integrity by enabling the reliability of the product data, the reusability of authorized product data, not only within the agency, but also across the networks. And in addition to that, we also aim to avoid the duplication of such data and the use of many services. So with implementation of PMS, the network can therefore benefit of the optimization and simplification of the data operating model, the facilitation of the data management practices by reducing in silos, This can also be achieved by improving the interoperability and exchange of the data across the systems. And most importantly is also the fact that the use of PMS will also streamline and simplify regulatory processes to allow a more efficient management of the product data and fulfillment of the regulatory requirements. The decision-making process can also be speed up by using PMS, and the communication with the relevant stakeholder will also be improved with the access to product data in PMS. Along with the development of PMS, I mentioned before that the agency is working closely with partners in the European Medicine Regulatory Network and industry to implement the UIDMP implementation guide. The UIG defines the implementation requirements, so the ISO-DMP standards, and this will be the basis for the submission and the exchange of medicinal products in the European Union. For your information, the latest version of the UIG is available on the EMA website, and this was released on June 2021. I would also invite you to read it carefully, and this guidance also contains several technical details and information which can allow you to be better prepared for the launch of PMS. The data model of the PMS database is therefore designed, as I was saying, to adhere to the ISO-DMP standards. However, it is important to specify that the database also contains EU-specific extensions to the ISO-DMP model. These extensions were deemed necessary to be implemented in order to adapt the system to meet specific EU requirements. Some examples that you will find in chapter 2 are indeed the data element related to the URD or the ATC code flag or the QPPV information to be entered. The total amount of the data elements that are contained in PMS is around 160 attributes. So as you can understand, if we compare it with the XVMPD database, the amount of the structured data to be entered in PMS is definitely higher than the current one, which is actually containing around 50 data elements. Therefore, the level of information of product data that the user can structure in PMS is definitely more granular, and so the business rules to follow when populating PMS can also be found in chapter 2. When using PMS, the type of message that is generated will be based on the fast healthcare interoperability resource. This is also known as HL75 standards. And in addition to this, you may remember that I previously mentioned other services of the SPOR program. So it's important to remember that those services such as SMS, OMS, and RMS are the key ones supporting the PMS system by creating, updating, storing, and providing to PMS information related to substance, organizations, location, and referentials. Another key point on PMS is that the database is developed to contain product data on authorized medicinal product that can be submitted by the relevant industry user. So to summarize, the role of PMS is to therefore support the implementation of the data-centric target operating model that is foreseen in order to manage medicinal product data within the European Union. And with this information related to the use and the benefits of sport services, but in particular PMS, I will now pass the floor to my colleague Noel Diamond, who will explain to you how the structured product data contained in PMS and eAF can support the use of the electronic application forms and how these are linked to it.
Thank you very much, Veronica, and a warm welcome me as well. If you don't mind, I will now take over the presentation. All right, let's start this. Well, today I will be talking about data. and mostly about data. I'm very sorry. I know there are a lot of questions about processes, but we have to go one step at a time. And as data is the most important commodity for us as agencies, our development approach will always be data-centric. So on processes, we do hope we have lots of discussions. We want to enable these discussions, but just not today. So for today, the big thing is the FHIR message, but also how do we use the PMS data in the DADI project for the electronic application forms. And there is one huge connection that we have, and also the only dependency. When you create a variation in the future, you have to select your product from PMS. This is an absolutely must, meaning all 550,000 products will have to be in PMS, and they will be. So if your product is not there, something went wrong, but most likely it will be there, like 99%, I do hope. Now, how this data looks like, what the data quality will be of this product is not that important. The main important thing for the software itself is that you can find that product. Now, of course, the better the data quality, the better the software will be, because not only do we integrate by selecting products, but we also integrate by showing you the present data of that product. Meaning the more data you have in PMS, the more present data we can show, the more proposed data we can suggest to the user. So I'm assuming cleaning up this data will take a while, but nevertheless, of course, we can launch the variation form and we can use it, and it will get better over time. And the better it is, the faster your applications will be. Now, to enable all of this and to enable this integration, both PMS and the eAF data structure have the same product structure. Why? Because there was an ISO, which we all know, the ISO IDMP, at least for humans now. And this gives us a structure that we can both build upon. So eAF mostly follows the IG here, which is an implementation of the ISO IDMP that Veronica has already mentioned. When I say IG, I mean the implementation guide from EMA that explains most of the fields. And most of these fields are the same for an electronic application form. Now, we're talking a lot about human, and of course we are starting with human, and veterinary can, in theory, do their own thing. They don't have to follow IDMP, but behind it, our data model will. We will try to keep veterinary as close as possible to human, even if it's not necessary. But of course, it will reduce not only cost in IT systems over Europe if they are close, but also it will reduce complexity as long as they are close together. Now, talking about data elements, not all PMS data elements, of course, are in scope of the electronic application forms, but a lot of them are. And which ones exactly, which data elements exactly will be covered in this webinar? Not only which ones, but how the data quality will be and all of this. And this is where Veronica and Marcus will give you a very good overview. For now, I can only tell you we will start with the processes of variation, MAA, and renewal, and have the elements that are required there, which are already nearly all of them. Now, of course, we are looking in the future to things like MA transfer, updates of QPPVs, PSMF locations, PHV contacts, marketing authorization status. So these are the things that are missing to have a complete PMS product. Missing now, I'm saying out of scope at the moment, doesn't say out of scope forever, it's just not in the first stage of this project. Now, this is again to reiterate, what we want to achieve here is not a new, we're not changing any business process. We're not changing the submission. We're keeping everything as is, well, everything, at least from a process side, because we're already changing a lot in data and we don't want to introduce too many changes at the same time. Now, we are focusing on providing not only a web-based form, but also a message standard, a common FHIR message standard for medicinal products within those two teams. So, of course, the PMS team is focusing on the product part, and the DADI team is focusing on the procedural part, so procedure information, but we are creating one message, one common structure, and this structure has resources that are publicly known because they are FHIR, it is a public standard. Anybody can look at the website and see how they are and try to learn this to have more knowledge on it themselves. Now, this will enable a lot of things. It will not provide it right away, but having a common data structure gives us the opportunity to create processes like the eAF can in theory then be fed back to PMS. We're not having it right at the start, but this is the goal. Because if you have your variation, you change your product, or you have your MAA, you create a new product. And sending this via Article 57 and re-entering everything is necessary at the moment, but hopefully in the future we can reuse that data because you have typed it in already. We want to use it to send it back. Same goes for data cleansing and enrichment. We are building the basis here. We're building the data structure for the FHIR message. Now, we will have more details on the processes in the future, but just not today. Today, let's try to understand the data. And to do this, I will give you a first overview of how a variation FHIR message looks like. Now, this is the first time we do something like this. It is always a little bit complex to do something as a first, but somebody has to. This also means the resources that we are using are evolving. We are not at the end, but somewhere in the middle of the project. We go to we discuss things with our colleagues from the US. We discuss them in connectathons of FHIR, and we present them as far as possible. And this is also what this first webinar is. It is a presentation to everybody to tell you how we are using FHIR to do applications and to encode medicinal products. It is a first introduction. This is, after this webinar, you do not have to understand it completely. This is really the first time NCAs hear about this, and the first time that any developers of RIM systems will have the opportunity now to see this. We are sharing information in the middle of the project, and we are going to share this again once it is more mature, but we want to give you an insight right now. The goal of this is not for a RIM system developer to start, well, look, this is the task I'm going to start developing now. This is for you to see what kind of knowledge you will need, which direction this is going, and for NCAs to see, okay, this is the message I can import in the future into my systems. And this is also the way we want to go. First, we are creating that standard. Then NCAs will read the standard, import into their systems, and then once we are mature enough, we will give the opportunity for RIM system vendors, etc., or large industries to discuss with us to see, can we create this outside and create it just as a FHIR message, not going to web form. For now, this is still a little bit in the future, but nevertheless, please look at it and think, can you actually do this? Now going into the detail, a task, the task resource that you can see here is the thing that we call an application. There were lots of possibilities to do this in FHIR. In the end, after discussing with many people, we have decided to take the task resource to encode our variation application. For now, it's just variation. In the future, this task might be an MAA form, it might be a renewal one. It is the overarching element that keeps together the products and something we call the change part. So in variation, there is the specific entry where we have these, we're going to use subtask and provenances to depict changes. We're going to use the task to create procedural information, and the medicinal product is the one that is from PMS. Now, this is just the overview. I will go into detail of each of these bits. The task itself contains the procedural information in key value pairs. So it has everything that you know from an electronic application form, which is not medicinal product data. Everything else goes in here. So in here you will find procedure type summaries, types of authorizations, procedure numbers, if it is a grouping or if it is a work sharing, any the background and details, the annex documents, the declaration, the proof of payment, the signatories. All of this is within the task. Now, what we also keep here is a reference to all the medicinal products within that application, because in a variation, of course, there can be many. In the MEA, there will be only one. And we also keep the list of changes. So what is being changed within a variation? For the medicinal product itself, these little blue boxes that are in here, those are entire products. Those are huge things, but they are not different from the ones that you know. If you have taken part in the testing from the FHIR API in PMS, then you already know those because they are the same. Now, when you select your PMS product, we will pull that information and we will load it into the eAF for somebody to change. We are both following the ISO IDMP, and PMS team is creating the EU IG, and the eAF team is looking at that IG. We have provided input, and Veronica and Marcus were kind enough to provide us with all attributes that we need. That's why last year you had a lot of EU IG changes. I'm sorry for that. That was mainly our fault. So that all the in there. And now we have a combined format. This medicine product is an independent element. So later on, if there are any other envelopes, it can be reused, and I think this is important. It also contains authorizations like the marketing authorization and manufacturer authorizations. So all those authorizations that are specific to medicinal products are in here. We'll see just in a bit. There are other authorizations that are procedural information, and they're within the task. Now, all right, sorry for that. I do hope the connection is better now. If not, please tell me and I will switch computer. Thank you, Marcus. All right, to conclude on this slide, we have heard about the subtask and the provenance, the subtask being the scope of the classification. So what is being changed, and the provenance is one exact change of a field in a product. So we are keeping those changes on a field level. The subtask, they contain, both of them contain the scope. So if it's a type 2 or 1A or 1B, so the procedure type, it contains the current value. So the thing that you have changed it from, and the proposed value. So the thing that you're changing it to. Now, this can be a free text change, or it can be a link to one of the medicinal product elements. And we say which, well, if this change affects multiple products or multiple presentations, those are linked here. Now, as promised, I will go into detail of this. This is all very conceptual. I'm not going to bore you with exact FHIR elements, but I would like to bring the message of how this looks conceptually, and I hope this is understandable. And this is why I'm going into detail of the task itself. So the task contains all procedural information, and I have listed it here. Everything is in key value pairs, so there is the domain, so you know if it's human or vet. There are the types of authorizations, like if it's central, if it's MRP or national. There are procedure numbers and RMS, CMS countries, so which countries are involved, we encode here. We encode the type of applications, if it's single, grouping, work sharing, or if it's a line extension. and we encode. We have a summary of all the procedure types. The actual procedure type is within the changes, but we keep a summary here for convenience. And we have other elements like changes concerned, but also the lead MAH. And usually what you have is a list of all MAHs, and this is no longer necessary. We only want to know which one is the applicant, which one is leading this. Because all of the other ones, we already know. You have selected your products. The product knows its own MAH. That's why we don't need anybody to type this in again. We don't need to encode it again. We already have that information. And a general assumption is information that EMA already has, that the FHIR message already has, you don't have to input again, and we're not going to encode again. We're going to reference. So the next one is the precise scope and background, which is large free text, and it is HTML. So if you encode bitmaps in here, so any kind of images, this will make this message very large. So up until here, the message is human readable. Here will be a section that a human cannot read because, well, an XML is for a system to interpret. So this will be a base 64 encoding. Now, the last important thing on the task itself is the scopes itself and the present and proposed, and this is not in the task as mentioned before, but in our list of changes. So in the subtask and provenance, which will be the next slide. The other things you will find here are the annex documents, the declaration. So this whole new section that you know, everything is in here already. The proof of payment section, the signatories. Now, in theory, FHIR XML can also digitally sign. The system itself is prepared, the message is prepared. We don't have the legal basis for it yet. Up until we still are in a state where every country has different signatory requirements. This is why, unfortunately, we can't just implement a digital signature, but at least we are ready. So if regulations update, the system will be able to implement this at some point. For now, you still have to export your PDF representation and sign it within your own system. The little bit here at the bottom are the regulated authorizations, which are not part of the product. And saying not part is, you will understand once you look at it in detail. The examples I will mention here are requesting a change to an orphan designation, a change to pediatric or market exclusivity. Those things we keep as regulated authorizations because they are something that describes the product, but on a procedural level. So they do have a link to the product, but conceptually they belong to the task because they are just requests to change the orphan designation and not the actual orphan designation. The actual one you will find in the medicinal product. Next up, I will go into detail of the task itself. Sorry, of the subtask and of the provenance. So the subtask contains the scope. So what are you changing? So each subtask has one scope. It contains the procedure type, 1B, etc., type 2. And it contains, well, the conditions and documentation. So they are for multiple changes the same, probably. The provenance has the change itself. So if you change, I don't know, the ATC code, or if you change the name, each name part will have one provenance because it is exactly one element that is being changed. If you change an entire ingredient, the provenance will link to that ingredient resource. So not each element, but the entire resource. And this is how you can look at the message and see what was the present and what was the proposed one, so you know what is the new thing. Now, the medicinal product itself that is contained within the message is already the 2B product. So all the provenance is good for is to tell you what it was before. Now, this is quite important for regulators to see because they would want to have what is actually being changed. Because if you just have the entire medicinal product, you would have to do the comparison yourself. Now, in theory, that is possible. And if somebody reading this message wants to do this, they can. They can just look at the latest XML and the last XML and do a comparison and get the same thing as the provenance gives you. But we wanted to not implement this 27 times in all member states, anybody who wants to do this, or anybody else who wants to read the message, to have to do the comparison implementation. And this is why we're keeping the changes in the provenances. Now going to the main part, the medicinal product. I'm going to talk a little bit about this medicinal product, but I will show you a different, well, this, what you see here is slightly different from what you're used to. What you can see here is a structure of the product, as you can see from FHIR resources. So we have the medicinal product definition, the administered product definition, manufactured item, ingredient, packaged product, and so on. You all know those because those are the existing FHIR resources. But the little boxes inside here are nearly the things that you see, but we have structured them slightly smaller because those are the things you can change according to the variation classification. So this is the structure you will also see in the web form, because those are elements you can change independently. Now, the things that have this, I don't know, beige color are the elements that are common for eAF and for PMS. Those are the exact same elements. Now, the things that are in green, those are the elements that are in PMS only. And this is the PHV inquiry, the QPPV, the PSMF location. So QPPV is still there from the MEA, but the variation no longer contains it. There is the data carrier, the marketing status, and the authorization status. If you have all of it, you have a complete medicinal product. So we're getting there, and we're starting with the common parts, and then at some point we will amend it with the green things. Now, there is this little blue box here that you can ignore. This is information in the eAF that is not in PMS. It is information about the clinical trial link, which is not necessary to store in PMS. I am actually not the real expert to talk about this. I wanted to share this slide with you, but there are better ones and that give you more information about the exact elements and where they come from and what the data structure is. For me, the last message I just want to give you is that this product lives by itself. It belongs to PMS and to eAF, but it is defined by the team, the project team that is doing PMS. So the eAF team here is advising, is asking for things to be added, but in the end, we're just using this like anybody else should if they want to implement a FHIR message in Europe containing a medicine product. And to go into detail, I will actually hand over to the real experts here, which are Veronica and Marcus.
Many thanks, Noel, for the introduction and information provided on XCVM and on eAF. I will be providing you, as Noel was mentioning, more details related to how the data elements indeed from PMS will be used to pre-populate the electronic application form. So to start from this slide, basically, as Noel just anticipated to use, the use of indeed PMS will be enabled within the variation procedure, so therefore by using the new format of the electronic application form. So in order to achieve this, efforts have been made to ensure that the two data models from PMS and DADI could be indeed aligned between each other. And the scope is indeed to ensure that a one-to-one matching between the common data elements could be met. So that's one of the most important principles. Importantly is also that the data elements that you can see included in the gray boxes, the one also mentioned by Noel, in these slides are the product data that will be retrieved from PMS to pre-populate the variation form. So information such as changes at the level of the medicinal product definition, like the medicinal product name or the authorized pharmaceutical form, or changes at the level of the manufacturer information, or other types of or information that you can see here in the gray boxes, are defined as common attributes between PMS and the electronic application form. Nevertheless, the alignment across the two data models, so PMS and DADI, has been performed based on the entire product data sets available. So in PMS, we have developed a data model based on ISO DMP standards, as I was mentioning. So we compared the data elements available in PMS versus what was needed to populate the electronic application form. And indeed, the results of these activities, was that several PMS attributes could be actually used in the scope and in the context of the electronic application form. However, in some cases, attributes were added also to PMS because we noticed that there was a need to introduce more attributes to meet indeed the eAF requirement. So an example of these fields are indeed related to the provision of the GMO. You will see more details in the next slide that Marcos will display and explain to you. So I was saying information on the genetically modified organisms, but also the composition, grouping descriptions for instances. So those information which falls within the medicinal product definition are extra elements that have been included in the PMS database in order to allow the user to extrapolate those information and make them available into the electronic application form. So in addition to that, the data elements that can be retrieved via PMS into the variation form follow specific paths which are in accordance to the ISO DMP standards and the FHIR standards. So this also means that the data that you see here are grouped and made available based on specific classes and resources. For the technical expert, you may, if you have a look at chapter 2, we have introduced a data model, a graph describing that, so you can have a look, and I would invite you. And those are basically reflected in those blue boxes in this slide. So I would say I would invite you to also focus on each single gray box that is displayed to observe in which resource these are included. So changes like pharmaceutical product or to the route of administration are clearly considered now changes performed at the level of the administrable product definition. You see, we have introduced also the definition concept, and these alignments and this is in alignment within the content of the ISO DMP, and so reflected in the PMS and the electronic application form. So information like updates to the legal status of supply also falls within the marketing authorization resource. You can see here in the slide, same concept applies for changes at the level of the packaged medicinal product definition or medical device, or information at the level of the ingredient or specific elements also to the marketing authorization classes will be possible by exploiting the data contained in PMS. On these regards, I was saying I would invite you really to read chapter 2 to get a full understanding on how the product data have been indeed structured in PMS, so you can also indirectly get a better overview of how the PMS data are retrievable in the future eAF. But in essence, any change to the PMS data elements highlighted in these gray boxes will be part of the scope of the new format of the variation form. So therefore, this data can be retrieved from PMS, can be updated, and an update can be proposed as part of the variation, of course. But once the changes are authorized by the competent authority, this data will be available in PMS to be reused in the next regulatory procedure. And this is the principle of reusability and streamline the procedures. But how can existing authorized product data be made available in PMS? So the quick answer, because my colleague Marco will provide you more details on that, is that we are migrating data from the current system that we have. And in order to achieve that, the agency has worked to set up a series of migration rules to allow indeed the initial data load from two databases. One is SciMed, which is an EMA database used by the agency to manage regulatory activities related to centrally authorized product data. And the other one is the so-known XCVMPD database used by MAH to submit authorized product data to fulfill indeed the legislative requirement. So this last database is important to bear in mind that it contains both centrally and non-centrally authorized product data. However, as I mentioned before, if you remember, the amount of attributes contained in XCVMPD is limited in comparison to the PMS data model. In addition to it, the product data contained in the two systems from which we perform the initial data load are captured differently. So this means that if some product data will be either available, completely available, or partially available in PMS. And an example of this can be the medical device information or the medicinal product name parts. So there will be the need in future to enrich those data in PMS, but also where necessary to correct based on the requirement, of course, that we have established in Chapter 2 of the UIG. So I will provide you more detail on the upcoming slides. The next one where I would like to explain another concept, which I believe is also important, is also related to the fact that there are still some differences between PMS and the electronic application form, so the two data models. This is because not all the PMS attributes and resources fall within the scope of the variation form, or more in general, within the electronic application form per se. So these data elements can be found in the green boxes in the slide. So attributes like the pharmacovigilance inquiry contact points, information on QPPV or PSMF locations, those informations are considered pure PMS attributes, which information are submitted from XCVMPD and then loaded into PMS, but are not subject to to be updated via the variation form. However, as an extra point to make to you, the data on QPPV are instead in the scope of the future format. So for instance, the initial marketing authorization application, but for now we are focusing on the variation eAF. So similar to what I have just explained on medicinal products referring to the marketing status, data related to the risk of short and long term of shortages or other problems related to the availability of medicines that can have an impact on the medicine supply chain, they are also not in the scope of the electronic application form. So this data will not be retrieved via the variation form. I'll now pass the floor to my colleague Marcos, as I was anticipating to you, and he will be providing you more details on the origin of the existing product data and where also the data enrichment and correction might be required in that sense. Marcos, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Veronica. So as Veronica was explaining here, what I'm trying to present is how the data is going to be migrated from the different sources we have internally at EMA. So as you can see on the right side of the slide, you have a diagram which is trying to represent the data model of PMS with the different resources and the data elements. And then you have a color code here. So some of the fields that you might know will be coming from Article 57. Article 57 contains data from CAPs and non-CAPs. The blue boxes or the blue color means that the data will be migrated from SciMed, which only contains CAP data. Obviously, as the data model of PMS is bigger than the data model of SIAMED or Article 57, there will be fields which are going to be empty because we are not tracking this information in our systems. Those are the gray fields. And as you might see, for example, in the medicinal product name parts, we will have data coming from Article 57, but we will also have missing data. You can also see that we have highlighted in red some of the fields. Those are fields that should be checked with the highest priority. Those are, for example, the ingredients that we will have in the manufacturer item. Those are coming, as you can see, from SIAMED, because we have this information for the centralized procedures, but we don't have this information for non-caps because we don't track this information in Article 57. Nevertheless, the ingredients at the pharmaceutical product level will be migrated from Article 57. So it's important for MA holders to check that the data is consistent between the ingredients in the pharmaceutical product and also the ingredients at the manufactured item. Another part that should be checked also for consistency is the manufacturing business operation. So all the manufacturers that are involved in one medicinal product should be checked. And there will be, as you can see here, missing data elements in this manufacturing business operation resource because we don't have all this information in SIAMED at the moment. As Veronica was saying as well, the data correction and enrichment is still under discussion. How the process and the data flow will be built is still under discussion, and we will provide more information once we have this information. In the next slide here, you have the information of which is the data that should be enriched depending on if we are covering a centralized procedure, a non-centralized procedure, or both. So obviously, as I was saying, there are a lot of data fields that will be empty for caps and non-caps. The most important one, let's say, is, for example, in the manufacturer business operation, we will have missing data elements for caps. For non-caps, we will have more missing data elements because we are not migrating data from SIAMED, so we will have less information such as the manufacturers, the legal status of supply, information about the package item component, and information regarding the manufactured item ingredients, etc. Obviously, for both caps and non-caps, because we don't have this data from SIAMED or from Article 57, we will be missing data from devices, the marketing status, self-life, data carrier, master file. All this data will need to be enriched, so because we don't have this information for the moment. As I was saying, the process on how this data is going to be enriched will be shared in due course when we have more information about that. It's important to understand that based on the migration, wrong data can be migrated, or inconsistent data can be migrated from the sources. It's important to understand that for cap data, you have not seen this data yet because this data is coming from SIAMED. So it's important for you to check this data, check that if this data is correct, and if it's not correct, you will have to provide these corrections in the future. As I was saying, manufacturers will be migrated from SIAMED, but also the ingredients from the manufactured item. For non-centrally authorized products, this data is coming from Article 57. This data is supposed to be as in the SMPC, but now the thing is that you also need to check the dossier and see that the data has been migrated correctly. So you need to check that the ingredients in the medicinal product without active substance, now you have an excipient as active substance. This will change with, if we follow IDMP in the UIG, this is now changing. So we need to check that the data is correct now. Also, we need to check that all the authorized packets are migrated, and we will display a process in case we need to provide additional packages because there is missing data. The data that is coming from caps and non-caps, this data has suffered several transformations because we have mapping and matching the data from SIAMED and Article 57. So inconsistencies might be found in the authorized pharmaceutical form, in the manufactured item, or the pharmaceutical product. So this data has to be checked and correct. It's important to understand that the industry is responsible to check the correctness of this product data that is going to be migrated or that will be migrated to PMS. as I said before, data that has been indicated in the highlighted fields, like the ingredients for the pharmaceutical product and the manufactured item, you need to check that this is correct and they are consistent. And we will provide you more information on how, in the future, we will provide you more information on how this enrichment process and the correction process is going to be handled. So this is my last slide. I will bring the floor again to Noel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcus. I will grab the screen for myself. Brilliant. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Veronica, for this very good introduction on where data comes from. I will now talk a little bit about, well, all of this XMLs, the structure. I've been going through the questions, trying to answer as many as I can, as did the entire team. But some of these questions will be hard to answer, like how do provenances exactly work? And for this purpose, what I can do is, first of all, give you some documentation from the project itself and explain how this documentation was created so you know how to read it, and then give you some examples of actual FHIR messages. And we're going to share this even though it is still mid-development. So they are more or less mature, but please keep in mind all of this documentation, all of these messages, they are shared now during our work and will change over the next 4 months probably. So to explain our documentation, you have to know how the IDMP model looks like. I'm showing this on the screen. This, of course, is very hard to read. And this is why actually you shouldn't read this on this screen. But what you should have is the EU IG Chapter 2. And if you're working as much with this as I do, so if you are in FHIR creations, you probably have this in auto start of your PC, and it will always start with the Chapter 2 because this contains all the elements that you need. Now, it also contains a larger version of this image, including the color coding. Just to reiterate, the medicinal product itself is yellow. The manufactured item package part is blue. The ingredient is orange, and so on. So these are the same colors that I'm going to use and show you in a bit on the screen in the documentation. And I'm going to start with this. And for that part, so just one more thing, all the other documentations that you can find and what we will publish with this webinar is, so most importantly, the IG Chapter 2 on the website of EMA. Second, we will publish, as was requested, an Excel sheet containing all data elements within the eAF. All of them have mappings to specific FHIR resources. And all of them have the names and the business rules or whatever you need to know to do the mapping by yourself, with this very strong caveat, this is work in progress. Second, we will publish after this webinar, probably end of this week or next week, this presentation, this Excel, but also examples. So there is a main example, which is the LOSA control example that many of you know, but we will also provide other examples, and mainly because LOSA gives you information on how the product looks in conjunction with a variation message, but it doesn't contain groupings and super groupings and IGs and work sharings. So for those and to understand how the provenance work, we have prepared around 12 examples of different messages, and we will share them as well. Last but not least, we are linking in this presentation the FHIR version that we're using in the DADI project, which is 4.6. And once release 5 goes live, we will of course all go to release 5. But for now, we are on version 6, and PMS will update at some point to that version as well. They are still on 4.2 or 4.4. but it is important to note there is no large difference between those versions because we're using extensions, and the extensions in 4.2 or 4.4 have been requested and are already in version 4.6. So the newest version just doesn't have the extension, but the element itself. All right, now please bear with me. I will share the Excel screen, the screen with the Excel sheet. In WebEx, you can use the zoom button to zoom in a little bit. I believe this is a little bit small. Let's see, maybe we can make this larger. So this should be readable. This is just the introduction, saying this is work in progress. This is about human variations. The veterinary fields are not in here yet, and if they are not confirmed because of the many changes that veterinary is undergoing. And there is a little bit of introduction how to read the spreadsheet, which is important because it's a huge sheet with hundreds of fields, and it has a hierarchy. So it is a well, just an Excel sheet. It doesn't have many dimensions, and this is why the hierarchy is important to understand, and we'll show you in a bit. All of the fields have a domain, so you can filter on human if you're only interested in those. The name of the field is the name, how it will be in the UI of the web form. It is mostly the same name as it is in the PDF today, but it will also contain slide updates because of the change to ISO IDMP. The type of the field is indicated either being a text or a date or a number, but it can also be a reference to a resource. For example, a medicinal product, an organization, a person, or it can be a select box. So you know there are multiple values here. It can be a radio button, meaning it's either or it can be a checkbox, meaning it's true or false. A cardinality is something we call if something is there either one time or many times. There will be a number 1 or there will be a number n if there are many times. And the conformance means if the field is going to be mandatory, optional, or if it is dependent on a business rule. And if it is dependent, you will see that business rule in the business rule column. Now, there are two sheets that I'm sharing with you, which is the variation part and the medicinal product part. I will start with the medicinal product and enlarge this enough. My colleagues will tell me if this is readable. I hope it is.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, on the left-hand side, you can see the hierarchy. If something is on the first level, like product data, in this case, it is in column A, there is a little box. If it is on the second level, in column B, there is a green box here, meaning name of the product is, the name of the medicinal product is underneath product data. And then you can see country, for example, is underneath name of the medicinal product. And on the same level as country, you have the language, the full product name, the different name parts, and the name parts, again, is in this case of type header, meaning this there is something underneath. This entire thing can be duplicated, and underneath you have on the next level the name part itself and the name part type. So if you want to read this, this is the column where it says human. For vet, these are the same fields. Beneath that, there are some additional fields. Now, this is not just variation. What is contained here is the medicine product itself. And it is the same for variation as it is for MAA forms. Of course, not all of these things can be changed in a variation, but the data is there. Now, the other column I have mentioned is the type. So it can be select, for example, the country will be a select. If it is a select, on the right hand, I will show you there is the name of the list. But it can also be a header. And being a header just means it is there because I want to give a cardinality and say if it's mandatory or not. If a header has a cardinality n, it means a product in this case can have many names. And in this case, well, the name part can have many countries, that each country can have many languages, but there is exactly one full product name for each language country combination. but underneath this full country name, there can be many name parts. Within each section of the name parts, there is exactly one name part and one name part type. And this is how this Excel sheet is being read. Now, M just means it's mandatory. D would mean it's dependent. In this case, you can look at the business rule. In this case, it says the invented name is mandatory. It can say a business rule, something is hidden or shown in specific cases. And there are other rules, like if something is a sub-selection of another list. There are things like this is visible only in marketing authorization and central variations. So there are all sorts of business rules that are not required, but just so if you are interested, I will share them as well. Now, after that, if an RMS list is used, the column list will tell you which list. It usually contains the ID of the list and then the name of the list. So this would be combined pharmaceutical dose form, the 206. After that, there is a column with the current DES. DES is the XML that we're using today to encode the electronic application form. And this is a path to that exact node. What we're using here is a search path that you can use to extract that specific node. This should no longer be necessary, and it's only there for reference. The important new bit is the FHIR resource mapping. And this is where we got a little bit creative because this was not there. So in the last 6 to 9 months, we have tried to create mappings for every field to the specific element. If it is an element that is in PMS, it will be the same mapping as in the EUIG, exactly the same. There should not be any difference. If the element is not in the EUIG, you will have a new mapping in here. After these, there are little X's if something is a FHIR extension. And there is a column which is called section name. Now, section name is just to understand where in the web form this element is being shown and on which screen. So if something is, for example, package or legal status, this element will be in those screens. And the last column is the classification code itself. This mapping is still under review. It is mostly done. So, and we're using this to manage how the screen works. So if you have a B2E5A variation, for example, it will show package and legal status. So for all of them, those will share package and legal status, these exact fields. And sometimes these classification codes have things like MAA, meaning the field is not there in variation, it will only be there in an MAA form. So all of the classification codes are in here. Sometimes there is line extension, meaning it also will not be in the variation form, but at the start in the line extension form, whatever that is. This is sometimes the MAA form and sometimes the variation form, depending on the data element. And this is how you read this file. This is the medicinal product part. The medicinal product currently has 259 elements. So quite a lot of attributes actually for a product. The other sheet is the variation part. And this is mainly the task. It follows the same structure. It has no colors because we don't have colors for procedures. But it reads the same way. All information around type of changes, around procedural information, the domain, everything that I have mentioned in the presentation is listed in here. Name and address of the MA holder, etc. Sometimes things have changed. You can see them, they are struck through because they still are in the PDF. We're going to remove them because we no longer need them in this case, because we already know we get the information from PMS. And sometimes things are red or yellow. This is when I myself am unclear, things that still have to be confirmed. As I said before, these are things that are still being developed, so please don't assume it is perfect. All right, so together with this, This is already a lot to read, but in order to actually understand this, what you will need are real life examples. And this is why we are going to also publish actual FHIR messages. Now, the main message I want to share with you is lossy control 20 milligrams. And for that purpose, we have for each message an XML representation. Oh, sorry, you can't actually see this. Give me a second. I will reshare my screen. So we have an XML representation and an HTML representation. For those who don't want to read XML, who don't want to learn it now just to be able to read this, we have tried to transform this into HTML, so it is a little bit easier to read. But of course, there will also be the XML message itself, which looks more or less like this. I'm going to enlarge this as well so you can see what I'm talking about. So these are exactly the same thing. There is the lossy control, 20 milligrams. Sorry, these are the same thing. This is lossy. There is a task. As you can see, there is a code in here. The same thing goes for the XML. There is a task in here. If I open up the task, there will be information about the code. You have the C14 in here. You have the C14 in here. So this HTML is really just to help you understand the XML message, because FHIR is a flat structure. It only uses references. Everything is more or less on the top level in FHIR, all the main resources. This HTML representation tries to show if something is linked to another resource, we're trying to show it underneath. For example, this is a subtask underneath a task. In the XML, it would be on the same level, but in the HTML representation, it's a little bit beautified for readability. So you can know this one is underneath the other one. So the lossy control example is the example you know from PMS, augmented a little bit, and we have invented a change. So there is no actual variation for this. We have just invented one for the sake of having an example to show to you. We've invented a type 2 variation. You can see just some made up information, but we have a C14 change here. And then you can see the subtask. You can see the details of that subtask. I'm going to scroll down a little bit just to show you where this ends. All the information in the task is procedural information. And underneath it, there is a product. Now, the product part is the to be product, is the exact same thing that you know from PMS. And it just contains everything the product should contain. Manufacturing operations, they contain for each manufacturer, a manufacturer operation. It contains the packages, in this case 1 or 3. The package itself contains the manufactured item. Those contain the ingredients. The second package, I will just scroll through it. A third package. And then the provenance from the product, which is the change of this. Bear with me, I'll come to this a little bit later. The administrable product, again with ingredients. The clinical use issue is the indication. Then you have the marketing authorization, and then let's get to the bottom. Okay, then you have these things called provenance change. Now, these provenance changes are actually not part of the product itself. They are the change. In this case, it's a primary packaging site that is being changed. It is linking to a resource. So a specific medicine product is being changed, an operation, and the ID of that element is this ID. So you can follow it to see exactly which element is being changed. And then within that, you can see what was the old element, because it is mentioned here. And this is how you read those messages. So the HTML representation is nice. The XML is a little bit more complex. And then there are other examples. So we have received some, we have chosen some PDFs that we have received and converted them into XML messages. And those are really very strongly redacted. So sometimes they do not make entirely sense, but they are real life examples. In this case, they are mostly work sharings and groupings. So things with wonder pills and wonder drugs, but a lot of products or a lot of other information. Now, these are the main things that we're going to share with you, apart from the presentation material itself, of course. Now, I have overrun quite a bit, and I'm very sorry for this. So we only have about 10 minutes left for questions and answers, but I can see in the background, the team is very eagerly answering those. So now I would like to hand over to Cristina Pepato to guide us through the Q&A part of our session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Noel, and thank you also to the attendees for being really active during the session, sending all the questions. So we have tried as much as possible to address them in writing. First of all, can you see my screen correctly? Can you see now the questions from Slido?
Yes, perfect, thank you.
Good. Okay, so here you will see that there are the questions that were most voted during the session, and so we will try to address them live. But since we have some time constraints, we will of course collect all the questions, and we will also share an updated Q&A document in the following weeks. So first question is, will we be able to download, export our products data from DADI for internal purposes? So I would kindly ask Noel and Christina from DADI team to address this question, please.
Yes, so at the moment, there are several screens. There's the product selection screen itself within the web form, where you can select your products or query all products from PMS. We don't have an export functionality foreseen on that screen. In theory, it is possible if we have that strong requirement. It wouldn't be much work, but it would only give you information around the main 8 or 9 elements. It will not give you the full product. So we don't have at the moment the option to download an entire medicine product.
Thank you, Noel. So second question is for you as well. So will the Excel document you presented before be distributed?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, all the presentation and documents presented today will be made available. Okay, so here we have a question for the PMS team. Often seen correct data submitted in eAF but then changed by EMA. How can industry take responsibility for that, and how can industry correct this quickly? So maybe Marcos or Veronica, can you take this?
Yeah, so I maybe can take this this question. So in principle, this is something that we will discuss in the future. We are discussing internally how this process of how Article 57 data is going to be pushed to PMS and how the data flow is working. So as we said before at the beginning of the webinar, this is a data focused webinar. The process will be handled in a different one. So if we can skip this question for the moment, but bear in mind that we are working on that. We are having internal discussions, and we will provide you obviously more information once we have agreed on the correct process.
Thank you very much, Marcos.
You're welcome.
Okay, so then we have, will the mapping of the 5 resources used by DADI with IDMP be published? So this is again for the DADI team in this case. So Noel, maybe.
This would be the same as before. Those mappings are within the Excel sheet, and we will provide this after the webinar.
Thank you. Okay, so now another question for PMS. So will you elaborate on the data scope coming from SciMed and how it will be updated, since we will continue with XMPD submissions only, but not PMS directly?
I can take this question. So
Please, Veronica.
Thank you. So we are planning indeed to update another chapter of the UIG to be published in version 2.2, and this chapter is chapter number 7, purely dedicated on the data migration aspect. So we will include also information explaining the relevant attributes, where these are coming from, and of course a brief introduction of the two databases that we use, so you can have more clarity on that.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Okay, so we have a now question for DADI product owners. So will the DADI project release a FHIR viewer using simple XML style sheet similar to the ECTD viewer?
This is a good question, Laurent. I wish we would. We have this tool that can transform it to HTML, but it doesn't work all the time, and it sometimes, so this is not something we can actually make public. Now, I believe the first person who writes a FHIR viewer for a FHIR message transforming this to HTML will sell quite a bit, so this might be a very good business idea. I wish we could do it, but we don't have the resources.
Thank you very much, Noel. And then let's go to the next question. So will data added in the DADI application form, which were not yet in PMS, transfer to the database immediately and then be visible for the next variation? So Veronica, can you maybe address this?
I can take it. Sorry.
Okay.
So yeah, in principle, when DADI goes live, we will not be able to push the data directly from the DADI variation form to PMS. This is something that we are looking to do in a later state. So yeah, for the moment, the data won't be pushed directly from the DADI application form, and that's why Article 57 submissions are still needed. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Marcos. Okay, I think we can go to the last question before launching the poll to gather your feedback. So if a product is not in PMS, is it possible to add the product information manually in DADI?
This is
Oh.
You want?
No, all yours.
Because I've received this question quite a lot, and we have discussed it with various colleagues from NCAs and industry as well. The product has to be in PMS and it has to be entered there. Now, the process is the same as it is today. You have to go through the Article 57 submission. Now, there are products that are never in PMS, like herbal medicines and some other products that variation forms are being used for today, but they are not actually under the Article 57 regulation. So they don't have to be there, but we were assured that they could be. So if you want to do a variation, if you want to use the variation form on a product that is not actually, well, the variation form is not actually supporting this business process, but I know a lot of people are using it. So what we're discussing now is the ability to, if you want, submit that product, and then if the product is there, you can use the web form. Now, please, Marcus, if you want to add anything to this, because this was quite a huge topic.
That's indeed what I was going to say. So it's important to understand that if a product is not in the DADI variation form, it's because the product is not in Article 57. So if you want to have this product, you should check Article 57, and if the product is not there, then you should include it in the database.
Yeah, so even though it's not mandatory to submit within Article 57, you can still do if you want to use the variation form on it.
Thank you both for your answers. As I said before, we will then collect all the questions that we received and address them as much as possible in our updated version of the Q&A document. Now, we would like to launch a quick poll to gather your views on the webinar. So please vote on a scale of 1 to 10. How likely are you to recommend this webinar to appear? And while you're voting, this poll will remain active for some minutes. I will give the floor back to Christina for the closing statements. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you for all our speakers today, and thank you for all the participants for the very good questions. We will, of course, publish the recording and the presentation and all the materials presented by the colleagues in this meeting on the EMA website and on the DADI website. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, you're always invited to contact us using the esapprogofficer@ema.europa.eu email address. And please keep on following us through the eSubmissions website. We are preparing to publish an updated information on the DADI project, including the timelines which were presented in the webinar last week, and we are also working on an updated version of the Q&A document, and that will of course include also questions that were posted in the Slido during the webinar last week, and will of course also include the technical questions that we have received today. So I would like to thank you all very much for the participation, and it is now exactly 12 o'clock, so we'll close this webinar now, and please note there will of course be a lot more information on the project, so please follow our news and you'll be invited to further webinars and presentations on the system. Thank you very much for all.